Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's project is this workout tank. It has a loose fit, slightly cropped front, but the coolest feature is this crossover back. Because of the way the back crosses over, you can sew all of this binding finish in just one seam. I'm going to show you how you can take an existing tank top pattern and adapt it to make this type of tank. And I'm also going to share with you the free size small tank pattern that I drafted for myself. So check out the link below to get all of the pattern details, and then I will meet you back here at the camera and we'll sew this up. Let's talk about the pattern. Now, if you follow the link in the description below, you're going to find the pattern that I drafted for myself in my size available for free. But if you're not my size, I'm going to show you how I drafted it. And I used my Texana tank pattern, which is the tank top I'm actually wearing, and then I modified it to make this crossback tank. So here's how I did it. This is a quarter scale drawing, and the red lines are the actual Texana tank pattern, and then the black lines are how I modified it. So the first thing I did was I went to the front and the back patterns, and I basically connected in a line to take out that waist shaping. So you can see I did the same thing on the back. And then on the front, I moved out. It was about ½ an inch. I think it was actually 3/8 of an inch that I moved that line out from where it was. On the back, I moved it in, and I moved it in 1½ inches here. So to the black line, which is where my pattern for this crossback is. Then on the front, I shortened it, and I shortened it, let's see, that is 1/4 inch. So I shortened it about 1.5 inches here on the front, and then I drew a curved seam up to the front. You can see the neckline and the arm side are almost the same. I did drop the arm side ½ an inch. So that's just to make it lower on the sides. Same thing on the back. I dropped that arm side ½ an inch. I raised this 1.5 inches. But then you can see I actually had to trace the back side here and then flip it over and trace it here. That way I could see a full back piece. And so I traced one shoulder and then curved down to that opposite arm side. Remember, I moved this line in 1.5 inches. And then again, I went from the arm side, and then I went straight down and just kept curving off to that side seam. So here's what my pattern pieces look like cut out. Here are the 2 back pieces, and then I cut one front piece on the fold, so it's going to look like this. And then the other thing I cut out was I made a bunch of 1.5 inch wide binding. And this is just strips of fabric cut so that they stretch long ways across the binding. And I'm going to use that to finish off the neckline, the armholes, and the crossback and the hems. And it actually is going to be like an infinity loop all in one piece. But we're getting to that later. The first thing we need to do to sew this up is we need to place the backs against the fronts, right sides together. So here is one back, and I want to match up the side seam and the shoulder seam. And the back is a little narrower than the front. That's because it's going to want to spread out with this crossback. So I took a little of the width out. Then I'm going to put the other piece like this, again matching up that shoulder and side seam. And then what I want to do is I want to sew across the shoulders, and I want to sew down the side seams. Okay, so once you've sewn those shoulder and side seams, here's what the tank top looks like. And in theory, since knit fabric doesn't unravel, you could totally just be finished here and call it done. I want to go ahead and add a finish to this. So I'm going to turn it right side out. And then when you lay this all out flat, this knit I'm working with is a little bit sticky, so it's being resistant to being laid out flat. Let me go ahead and show you something. This is about as good as I'm going to get it for now. If I start right here at this back bottom edge, and then I go around and around, and now I'm on the front neckline, and then I keep going around, And now I'm on the other side on the back neckline and the other armhole. And I keep going around that edge, and now I'm coming across the other, the other crossback. And I keep going around and around. I'm on the front hem, and then around and around, across the back. And look at this, I'm back at the armhole. This is where I started. So really this tank is kind of an infinite loop in that you can start at any one place and then you can just keep sewing until you hit all the edges. Because of that, it's going to be pretty easy to attach the binding. So all I did was I sewed several strips of binding together so that I'm going to have plenty to go all the way around the whole thing. And I am going to start right here at an underarm, and then I'm not even going to pin. I'm just going to go to my machine and start attaching this binding right sides together all the way around. So let's head over to the machine and I will show you how I do this. So this is a side seam here, and I've just taken my binding, I folded it like 1/2 inch to the wrong side and matched it up with that seam. And now they're right sides together, and I'm just going to start stitching. And when I get to the curved areas, like I'm starting to curve up the arm side a little bit, then I'll just gently stretch the binding to fit that curve. And I'll keep going around that way. Okay, we're about to be back at where I started. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlap that a little bit when I get there. And then once I've overlapped a little bit, I can cut off the rest of the extra binding that I had. Okay, now that I am done sewing that binding on once, I'm going to wrap it around and I'm going to stitch it again. And my machine converts to a cover stitch, so I'm going to convert it to a cover stitch here. But I want to emphasize, if you don't have a serger, if you don't have a cover stitch, that's okay. You can totally do this on a regular sewing machine as long as you have a zigzag stitch. You would just zigzag the binding on that first time like I just did, and then you would wrap it around and you would zigzag again to enclose the raw edge and to secure that binding. Okay, let me show you how I convert this machine over to cover stitching from serging, which is what I was using first. So the first thing is I need to take it from overlock, and I already flipped this switch over to chain cover. Then I'm going to open it up and I'm going to pull this piece off, just slides right out, and I'm going to stick on the cover stitch piece. Then I need to thread it. So I'm going to switch this over to threading. I'm going to crank the wheel towards me until these lock. And then I am going to thread, starting with the loopers here. And I'll watch for the thread to appear over here. Oh, not quite. Let's do that again. There it is. And then I need to thread the top. So I've got a bobbin of the colored thread here, and I've got a spool because I didn't want to get two spools of the same colored thread. Gotta put the foot down and then put the needle threader down. Make sure that you've got the correct threads on the correct side. And then I like to thread these one at a time. Like you'll see it kind of get sucked in to the eye of the needle. And then there they go out the back. Right, and then switch this back to serging, close everything up. And I always sew on a scrap piece first before I put in my regular project. Okay, I've converted my machine to cover stitch mode. And what I'm going to do now, this is where I started, I'm going to wrap the binding around to the wrong side, and this folded edge that I started with, You'll see how that ends up with no raw edges now. And then I'm just going to stitch around all the way again, wrapping that binding around to the back side to catch it. Okay, so I'm about to be back to where I started. So the first thing I do before I get there is I use a pin to pull the front threads to the back side, and that way I can knot those off. And then I'm going to overlap my stitching from the beginning. And then pull the needles up, lift the presser foot. I use the scissors to sweep the top threads forward and then pull straight back. And what that'll do is it'll pull all my threads to the back so that now I can just knot them. So here's the tank after all that binding has been sewn on. And there's one more optional step once you're done with this. And it's going to depend on how tightly you wrapped your binding around the edges. So you can see that I wrapped mine pretty tightly, and therefore there's a little bit of extra raw fabric curling over the edge. So what you can do is you can just take scissors and trim off that extra fabric. Again, this is an optional step, and if you do it, you're going to want to be very careful that you don't end up cutting a hole in your garment while you're trimming off that extra. So that is how we make a crossback tank.